Snowball has found the place that he wants to read. The last, the last one Snowball has, Volume 5, The Real Barenziah, by Anonymous. Snowball thinks these books are a little too long. Start that. As Symmetris had predicted, the theft of the Staff of Chaos had a few short-term consequences. The current Emperor Uriel Septim sent some rather stiff messages expressing shock and displeasure at the staff's disappearance and urging Symmetris to make every effort to locate its whereabouts and communicate developments to the newly appointed Imperial Battle Mage, Jaeger Tharin, in whose hands the matter had been placed. Holy crap, that's a long sentence. Tharin, Symmetris thundered in disgust and frustration as he paced about the small chamber where Barenziah, now some months pregnant, was sitting, serenely embroidering a baby blanket. Jaeger Tharin, indeed. I wouldn't give him directions for crossing the street. Not if he were a doddering old blind sot. What have you against him, love? I just don't trust that mongrel elf. Part dark elf, part high elf, and part the gods only know what. All the worst qualities of all his combined bloods. I'd warrant. Huh. So he's a conniving, sneaky jerk who's. I don't know what the bad qualities of dark elves are. Snowball is confused. He snorted. No one knows much about him. Claims he was born in southern Valenwood of a wood elf mother. Seems to have been everywhere since. Barenziah sunk in the contentment and lassitude of pregnancy, had only been humoring Symmetris thus far. But now she suddenly dropped her needlework and looked at him. Something had piqued her interest. Symmetris, could this be Jaeger Tharin? Wait, could this Jaeger Tharin have been the nightingale disguised? Symmetris thought this over before replying, Nay, my love, human blood seems to be the one missing component in Tharin's ancestry. To Symmetris, Barenziah knew that was a flaw. Her husband despised wood elves as lazy thieves and high elves as effete intellectuals. But he admired humans, especially Bretons, for their combination of pragmatism and intelligence and energy. The Nightingales of Ebonheart of the Ra-Etham clan, House Kalalu of the House of Mora, in particular, I'll be bond. Okay, my mind cannot wrap around that sentence. Nightingales of Ebonheart, of Ra-Atham clan, House Kalu, K-L-A-A-L-U, Kla-Alu. The House of Mora, in particular, I'll be bound. The house has had human blood in it since her time. Ebonheart was jealous that the staff was laid here. When Tiber Septim took the horn of summoning from us. Wonder if that's the horn of Jorgen Windcaller. Barenziah sighed a little. The rivalry between Ebonheart and Mournhold reached back almost to the dawn of Morrowind's history. Once the two nations had been one, all the lucrative mines held in fief by the Ra-Athams, whose nobility retained the high kingship of Morrowind, Ebonheart had split into two separate city-states, Ebonheart and Mournhold, when Queen Leanne's twin sons, grandsons of the legendary King Morrowind, were left as joint heirs. At about the same time, the office of High King was vacated in favor of a temporary war leader to be named by council in times of provincial emergency. Still, Ebonheart remained jealous of her prerogatives as the eldest city-state of Morrowind. First among equals was the phrase its rulers often quoted, and claimed that rightful guardianship of the Staff of Chaos should have been entrusted to its ruling house. Mournhold responded that King Morrowind himself had placed the staff in the keeping of the god Effin. Who is this Effin god? And Mournhold was unarguably the god's birthplace. Why not tell Jaeger Thorn of your suspicions, then? Let him recover the thing. As long as it's safe, what does it matter who recovers it or where it lies? Simraptor stared at her without comprehension. It matters, he said softly after a while, but I suppose not that much. Aye, he added, certainly not enough for you to concern yourself further with it. You just sit there and tend to your... And here he smiled at her wickedly. Embroidery. This is an odd interruption for the quote. I gotta interrupt this a minute. The right way to write that would have been, you just sit there and tend to your embroidery. He smiled at her wickedly. Barenziah flung the sampler at him. It hit Simraptor square in the face, needle, thimble, and all. In a few months, too bad the pointy end didn't hit. In a few months, Barenziah gave birth to a fine son, whom they named Helseth. Nothing more was heard of the Staff of Chaos or the Nightingale. If Ebonheart had the staff in its possession, they certainly did not boast of it. The years passed swiftly and happily. Helseth grew tall and strong. He was much like his father, whom he worshipped. When Helseth was 8 years old, Barenziah bore a second child, a daughter, to Simrator's lasting delight. Helseth was his pride, but little Morgaiah, named for Simrator's mother, held his heart. Sadly, the birth of Morgaiah was not the harbinger of better times ahead. Relations with the Empire slowly deteriorated, for no apparent reason. Taxes were raised, and quotas were increased with each passing year. Simraptor felt that the Emperor suspected him of having had a hand in the staff's disappearance, and sought to prove his loyalty by making every effort to comply with the escalating demands. Probably Thalmor. He lengthened working hours and raised tariffs, and even made up some of the difference from both the royal exchequer and their own private holdings. But the levies multiplied, and Commoners and nobles alike began to complain. It was an ominous rumble. Could this be the war with the Thalmor? I want you to take the children and journey to the imperial city, Simraptor said at last in desperation one evening after dinner. You must make the Emperor listen, else all Mournhold will be up in revolt come spring. He grinned forcibly. You have a way with men. Love, you always do. Barenziah forced a smile of her own. Even with you, I take it. Yes, especially with me, he acknowledged amiably. Both children. Barenziah looked over towards a corner window where Helseth was strumming a lute and crooning a duet with his little sister. Helseth was 15 by then. Morgaya was 8. They might soften his heart. Besides, it's high time Helseth was presented before the imperial court. Perhaps, but that's not your true reason. Barenziah took a deep breath and grasped the nettle. You don't think you can keep them safe here. If that's the case, then you're not safe here either. Come with us, she urged. He took her hand in his. Barenziah, my love, heart of my heart, if I leave now, there'll be nothing for us to return to. Don't worry about me, I'll be all right. I can take care of myself. And I can do it better if I'm not worried about you or the children. Barenziah laid her head against his chest. Just remember that we need you. I need you. We can do without the rest of it if we have each other. Empty hands and empty bellies are easier to bear than an empty heart. She started to cry, thinking of the nightingale and that sordid business with the staff. My foolishness has brought us to this pass. He smiled at her tenderly. If so, 'tis not so bad a place to be. His eyes rested indulgently on their children. None of us shall ever go without, or want for anything. Ever. Ever, my love. I promise you. I cost you everything once, Barenziah. And Tiber Septim, I, without my aid, the empire would never have begun. I helped its rise. His voice hardened. I can bring about its fall. You may tell Uriel Septim that. That my patience is not infinite. Barenziah gasps. Simraptor was not given to empty threats. She had no more imagined that he would ever turn against the Empire than the old house wolf lying by the gate would turn on her. How? She demanded breathlessly, but he shook his head. Better that you not know, he said. Just tell him what I've told you. Should he prove recalcitrant, and do not fear. Recalcitrant is a weird word. He's septum enough that he will not take it out on the messenger. He smiled grimly. For if he does, if he ever harms the least hair on you, my love, or the children, so help me all the gods of Tamriel, he'll pray that he hadn't been born. I'll hunt him down, him and his entire family, and I won't rest until the last septum is dead. The red, dark elf eyes of Simraptor gleamed brightly in the ebbing firelight. I plight you that oath, my love, my queen, my Barenziah. Barenziah held him as tight as she could. but in spite of the warmth in his embrace, she couldn't help shivering. Uh-oh. War with the Empire. Barenziah stood before the Emperor's throne, trying to explain Mournhold's straits. She waited weeks for an audience with Uriel Septim, having been flobbed off on the pretext or that. Having been flobbed off on this pretext or that. That's weird. His Majesty is indisposed. An urgent matter demands His Excellency's attention. I am sorry, Your Highness. There must be some mistake. Your appointment is for next week. No, see... And now it wasn't even going well. The Emperor did not even make the slightest pretense at listening to her. He hadn't invited her to sit. Nor had he dismissed the children. Helseth stood still as a carven image, but little Morga had begun to fuss. The state of her own mind didn't help her any. Shortly upon arrival at her lodgings, the Morholdian ambassador to the imperial city had demanded entry, bringing with him a sheaf of dispatches from Symmetris. Bad news and plenty of it. The revolt had finally begun. The peasants had organized around a few disgruntled members of Mournhold's minor nobility, and were demanding Symmetris step down and hand over the reins of the government. Only the Imperial Guard and a handful of troops whose families had been retainers of Barenziah's house for generations stood between Symmetris and the rabble. Hostilities had already broken out, but apparently Symmetris was safe and still in control. Not for long, he wrote. He entreated Barenziah to try her best with the Emperor, but in any case she was to stay in the imperial city until he wrote to tell her it was safe to go back home with the children. Civil war brought on by an overly greedy empire. She had tried to barge her way through the imperial bureaucracy with little success, and to add to her growing panic, all news from Mournhold had come to a sudden stop. Tottering between rage and the empire's numerous major domos, the empire's numerous major domos, and fear of the fate awaiting her and her family, the weeks had passed by tensely, agonizingly, remorselessly. Then one day the Mournholdian ambassador came calling to tell her she should expect news from Symmetris the following night at the latest, not through the regular channels, but by Nighthawk. Seemingly by the same stroke of luck, she was informed that the same day by a clerk from the imperial court that Uriel Septim had finally consented to grant her an audience early on the morrow. The Emperor had greeted the three of them when they came into the audience chamber with a too bright smile of welcome that nonetheless didn't reach his eyes. Then, as she presented her children, he had gazed at them with a fixed attention that was real yet somehow inappropriate. Barenziah had been dealing with humans for nearly 500 years now, and had developed a skill for reading their expressions and movements that was far beyond what any human could ever perceive. Try as the Emperor might to conceal it, there was a hunger in his eyes, and something else, regret, Yes, regret. But why? He had several fine children of his own. Why covet hers? And why look at her with such a vicious, however brief, yearning? Perhaps he had tired of his consort. Humans were notoriously, though predictably, inconsistent. After that one long burning glance, his gaze had shifted away as she began to speak of her mission and the violence that had erupted in Mournhold. He sat still as a stone throughout her entire account, puzzled at his inertia and vexed no end. Barenziah stared into the pale, set face, looking for some trace of the septums she'd known in the past. She didn't know Uriel Septim well, having met him once when he was still a child, and then again at his coronation 20 years later. Twice, that was all. He had been a stern and dignified presence at the ceremony, even as a young adult, yet not icily remote as this more mature man was. In fact, despite the physical resemblance, he didn't seem to be the same man at all. Not the same, yet something about him was familiar to her. More familiar than it should be. Some trick of posture or gesture. Suddenly she felt very hot, as if lava had been poured over her. Illusion. She had studied the arts of illusion well since the nightingale had deceived her so badly. She had learned to detect it, and she felt it now, as certainly as a blind man could feel the sun on his face. Illusion, but why? Her mind worked furiously, even as her mouth went on reciting details about Mournhold's trouble. Vanity. Humans were oft as ashamed at the signs of aging as elves were proud to exhibit them. Yet the face of Uriel Septim seemed consistent with his age. Well, why wouldn't it? Barenziah dared use none of her own magic. Even petty nobles had means of detecting magicka, if not actually shielding themselves from its effects within their own halls. The use of sorcery here would bring down the Emperor's wrath as surely as drawing a dagger would. Magic, illusion. Suddenly she was brought to mind of the nightingale, and then he was sitting before her. Then the vision changed, and it was Uriel Septim. He looked sad, trapped. And then the vision faded once more, and another man sat in his place, like the nightingale, and yet unlike. Pale skin, bloodshot eyes, elven ears, and about him a fierce glow of concentrated malice, an aura of eldritch energy, a horrible, destructive shimmer. This man was capable of anything. And then once again she was looking into the face of Uriel Septim. How could she be sure she wasn't imagining things? Perhaps her mind was playing tricks on her. She felt a sudden vast weariness, as if she'd been carrying a heavy burden too long and too far. She decided to abandon her earnest narrative of Mournhold's ills, as it was quite plainly getting her nowhere, and switched back to the peasantry. Peasantry, however, with a hidden agenda. Do you remember, sire, Symmetris and I had, and I, bleh. Do you remember, sire, Simraptor and I had dinner with your family shortly after your father's coronation. You are no older than tiny Morga here. We were greatly honored to be the only guests that evening, except for your best friend, Justin, of course. Ah, yes, the Emperor said, smiling cautiously, very cautiously. I do believe I recall that. You and Justin were such friends, your Majesty. I was told he died not long after. A great pity. Indeed, I still do not like this to speak of him. His eyes turned blank, or blanker. If it had been possible, or blanker if it had been possible. As for your request, milady, we shall take it under advisement and let you know. Barenziah bowed and did as the children. Barenziah bowed and did as did the children. That's it. As did the children. A nod from the emperor dismissed them, and they backed away from the imperial presence. She took a deep breath when they emerged from the throne room. Justin had been an imaginary playmate, although young Uriel had insisted a place be set for Justin at every meal. Not only that, Justin, despite the boyish name, had been a girl. Symmetris had kept up the joke long after she had gone, the way of imaginary childhood friends, inquiring after Justin's health whenever he and Uriel Septim met, and being responded to in as mock serious a fashion. The last Barenziah had heard of Justin several years ago. The emperor had evaded, joked elaborately to Symmetris. The last Barenziah had heard of Justin several years ago. The emperor had evidently joked elaborately to Symmetris that she had met an adventurous though incorrigible Khajiit youth, married him, and settled down in Lilandril to raise fire ferns and mugworts. The man sitting on the emperor's divan was not Uriel Septim. The nightingale. Could it be? Yes, yes. A chord of recognition rang through her, and Barenziah knew she was right. It was him. It was the nightingale, masquerading as the emperor. Symmetris had been wrong, so wrong. What now? She worried frantically. What had become of Uriel Septim? And more to the point, what did it mean for her and Symmetris, and all of Mournhold? Thinking back, Barenziah guessed that their troubles were due to this false emperor. The nightingale spawned glamour, or whatever had... What? The nightingale spawned glamour, or whatever he really was. He must have taken Uriel Septim's place shortly before the unreasonable demands on Mournhold had begun. That would explain why relations had deteriorated for so long. As humans reckoned time, long after her disapproved liaison with Tiber Septon. The nightingale knew of Symmetris' famed loyalty and knowledge of the Septim house, and was effecting a preemptive strike. If that were the case, they were all in terrible danger. She and the children were in his power here in the imperial city, and Symmetris was left alone to deal with the troubles of the nightingale's brewing in Mournhold. He copied the emperor and no one noticed. How weird. What must she do? Barenziah impelled the children ahead of her. What must she do? Barenziah impelled the children ahead of her, a hand on each shoulder, trying to stay cool, collected. Her ladies-in-waiting and personal knights escort trailing behind. Finally, they reached their waiting carriage. Even though their suite of rooms was only a few blocks from the palace, royal dignity forbade travel on foot for even short distances, and for once Barenziah was glad of it. The carriage seemed a kind of refuge now. false as she knew the feeling must be, a boy dashed up to one of the guards and handed him a scroll, then pointed towards a carriage. The guard brought it to her. The boy waited, eyes wide and shining. The epistle was brief and complimentary, and simply inquired if King Edwar of Wayrest of the province of High Rock might be granted an audience with the famed Queen Barenziah of Mournhold, as he had heard of her and would be pleased to make her acquaintance. Barenziah's first impulse was to refuse. She wanted only to leave the city. Certainly she had no inclination towards dalliance with a dazzled human. She looked up frowning, and one of the guards said, "Milady, the boy says his master awaits your reply yonder." She looked in the direction indicated and saw a handsome elderly man on horseback, surrounded by half a dozen courtiers and cavaliers. He caught her eye and bowed respectfully, taking off a plumed hat. Yeah, it would be weird to have a plum on your hat. "Very well," Barenziah said. Said to the boy on impulse, "Tell your master he may call on me tonight, after the dinner hour." King Edward looked polite and gave a rather worried, but not in the least love-struck King Edward looked polite and grave and rather worried, but not in the least love-struck. That's weird. At least that was something, she thought pensively. Barenziah stood at the tower when... Okay, let's start over. Barenziah stood at the tower window, waiting. She could sense the familiar's nearness, but though the night sky was clear as day to her eyes, she could not yet see him. Then suddenly he was there, a swift-moving dot beneath the wispy night clouds. A few more minutes and the great nighthawk finished its descent, wings folding, talons reaching for her thick leather armband. When did she have a hawk? Okay. She carried the bird to its perch, where it waited, painting as her impatient fingers felt for the message secured in a panting, not painting. Okay, she carried the bird to its perch where it waited, panting, as her impatient fingers felt for the message secured in the capsule on one leg. The hawk drank mightily from the water till when she had done. That's the way it's written. Then ruffled its feathers and preened, secure in her presence. A tiny part of her consciousness shared its satisfaction at a job well done. Mission accomplished and rest earned. Yet beneath it all was unease. Things were not right, even to its humble avian mind. Her fingers shook as she unfolded the thin parchment and pored over the cramped writing. Not symmetrous, bold hand. Barenziah sat slowly, fingers smoothing the document while she prepared her mind and body to accept disaster calmly, if disaster it would be. Disaster it was. Disaster all around. Disaster for everyone. The Imperial Guard had deserted Simraptor and joined the rebels. Simraptor was dead. The remaining loyal troops had suffered a decisive defeat. Simraptor was dead. The rebel leader had been recognized as a king of Mournhold by imperial envoys. Simraptor was dead. I know that. I've gotten that already. You've said it 3 times. Barenziah and the children had been declared traitors to the Empire, and a price set on their heads. Simraptor was dead. Wow, is Simraptor dead? So the audience with the Emperor earlier this morning had been nothing but a blind, a ruse, a charade. The Emperor must have already known. She was just being strung along, told to stay put, take things easy. Milady, Queen, enjoyed the imperial city and the delights it has to offer. Do make your stay as long as you want. Her stay, her detention, her captivity, and in all probability her impending arrest. She had no delusions about her situation. She knew the Emperor and his minions would never let her leave the imperial city ever again, at least not alive. Simraptor was dead. Milady! Barenziah jumped, startled by the servant's approach. What is it? The Breton is here. Milady, King Edward. The woman added helpfully, noting Barenziah's incomprehension. She hesitated. Is there news, milady? She said, nodding towards the Nighthawk. Nothing that will not wait. Simraptor is dead. I just have to add that in. Barenziah said quickly, and her voice seemed to echo in the emptiness that suddenly yawned like a... The emptiness yawned. Okay. The emptiness yawned like a gaping abyss inside her. The emptiness is bored. See to the bird. She stood up, smoothed her gown, and prepared to attend on her royal visitor. She felt numb as the stone walls around her, numb as the quiescence of the night air, numb as a lifeless corpse. Simraptor was dead. Damn it. King Edward greeted her gravely and courteously. If a bit fulsomely? If a bit fulsomely, he claimed to be a fervent admirer of Simraptor, who figured prominently in his family legends. Excuse me, he's dead. Gradually, he turned the conversation to her business with the Emperor. He inquired after details and asked if the outcome had been favorable to Mournhold. Finding her non-committal, he suddenly blurted out, "Milady Queen, you must believe me. The man who claims himself the Emperor is an impostor. I know it sounds mad, but No, Barenziah said with sudden decisiveness. You are entirely correct. My Lord King, I know. Edward relaxed into his seat for the first time. Eyes suddenly shrewd. You know, you're not just humoring someone you might think a madman. I assure you, my lord, I am not. She took a deep breath. And who do you surmise is dissembling as the Emperor? The Imperial Battermage Jaeger Tharn. Ah, my lord King, have you perchance heard of someone called the Nightingale? Yes, milady, as a matter of fact I have. My allies and I believe him to be one and the same man as the renegade Tharn. I knew it. Barenziah stood up and tried to mask her upheaval. The Nightingale, Jaeger Tharn. Oh, but the man was a demon, diabolical and insidious, and so very clever. He had contrived their downfall seamlessly. Perfectly. Simraptor, my Simraptor. Edward coughed defendingly. Milady, we need your aid. Barenziah smiled grimly at the irony. I do believe I should be the one saying those words. But go on, please. Of what assistance might I be, my lord king? Quickly the monarch outlined a plot. The mage Rhea, or is that Kia? You're not a car. Rhea Sylmain, of late apprenticed to the vile Jaeger Tharn, had been killed and declared a traitor by the false emperor. Yet she had retained a bit of her powers and could still contact a few of those she had known well on the mortal plane. Hold a seance? Okay. She had chosen a champion who would undertake to find the Staff of Chaos, which had been hidden by the treacherous sorcerer in an unknown site. This champion was to wield the staff's power to destroy Jaeger Tharn, who was otherwise invulnerable, and rescue the true emperor being held prisoner in another dimension. However, the champion, while thankfully still alive, now languished in the Imperial dungeons. Tharn's attention must be diverted while the chosen one gained freedom with Rhea's spirit's help. Barenziah had the false emperor's ears and seemingly his eyes. Would she provide the necessary distraction? I suppose I could attain another audience with him, Barenziah said carefully. But would that be sufficient? I must tell you that my children and I have just recently been declared traitors to the Empire. In Mournhold, perhaps, milady, and Morrowind. Things are different in the Imperial City and the Imperial Province. The same administrative morass that makes it near impossible to obtain an audience with the Emperor and his ministers also quite assures that you would never be unlawfully imprisoned or otherwise punished without benefit of due legal process. In your case, milady, and your children's, the situation is further exacerbated by your royal rank. As queen and heirs apparent, your persons are considered inviolable, sarcosant. Snowball does not know how to pronounce that. In fact, the king grinned. The imperial bureaucracy, milady, is a double-edged claymore. So at least she and her children were safe for the time being. Then a thought struck her. Simraptor is dead. My lord king, what did you mean earlier when you said I had the false emperor's eyes? And seemingly at that. Edward looked uncomfortable. It was whispered among the servants that Jaeger Tharn kept your likeness in a sort of shrine in his chambers. I see. Her thoughts wandered momentarily to that insane romance of hers with the nightingale. She had been madly in love with him. Foolish woman. And the man she had once loved had caused... Foolish woman, and the man she had once loved had caused to be killed the man she truly did love. Loved. He's gone now. Simraptor is dead. He still couldn't bring her... She still couldn't bring herself to accept the fact that Simraptor was dead. But even if he is... She told herself firmly, my love is alive and remains. He would always be with her, as would the pain of living the rest of her life without him, the pain of trying to survive each day, each night, without his presence, his comfort, his love, the pain of knowing he would never see his children grow into a fine pair of adults, who would never know their father. How brave he was, how strong, how wonderful, how loving, especially little Morgaya. Simichus was dead. And for all you have done to my family, Nightingale, you must die. Does that surprise you? Edware's words broke into her thoughts. What surprised me? Your likeness in Tharn's room. Oh, her features set imperturbably. Snowball cannot pronounce this word. Imperturbably. Yes and no. Edward could see from her expression that she wished to change the subject. He turned once again to their plans. Our chosen one may need a few days to escape. Milady, can you gain him a bit more time? You trust me in this, my lord king. Why? We are desperate, milady. We have no choice. But even if we did, why, yes, I would trust you. I do trust you. Your husband has been good to my family over the years. The Lord Simichus is dead. What? Barenziah related the recent events quickly and coldly. Milady Queen, but how dreadful. I'm so sorry. Yeah, I broke into a little William Shatner there by accident. Milady Queen, but how dreadful. I'm so sorry. For the first time, Barenziah's glacial pose was shaken in the face of sympathy. She felt her outward calm start to crumble. She gathered her composure and willed herself to stillness. Under the circumstances, milady, we can hardly ask, nay, good my lord. Under the circumstances, I must do what I may to avenge myself upon the murderer of my children's father. A single tear escaped the fortress of her eyes. She brushed it away impatiently. In return, I ask only that you protect my orphaned children as you may. Edward drew himself up. His eyes shone. Willingly do I so pledge. Most brave and noble queen, the gods of our beloved land, indeed Tamriel itself, be my witness. His words touched her absurdly. What? His words touched her absurdly, yet profoundly. I thank you from my heart and my soul, good my lord King Edward. You have mine and my children's everlasting gratitude. She broke down. You finally figured out Simichus was dead. Such a shocker. Is Simichus really dead? She did not sleep that night, but sat in a chair beside her bed, hands folded on her lap, thinking deeply and long into the waxing and waning of the darkness. She would not tell the children, not yet, not until she must. She had no need to seek another audience with the Emperor. A summons arrived at first light. She told the children she expected to be gone for a few days, bade them give the servants no trouble, and kissed them goodbye. Morgaya whimpered a bit. She was bored and lonely in the imperial city. Helseth looked dour, but said nothing. He was very like his father. At the imperial palace, Barenziah was escorted not into the great audience hall, but a small parlor where the emperor sat. This is almost an hour-long book. Where the emperor sat at a solitary breakfast. He nodded a greeting and waved his hand towards the window. Magnificent view, isn't it? Barenziah stared out over the towers of the great city. It dawned on her that This was the very chamber where she first met Tiber Septim all those years ago, centuries ago. Tiber Septim, another man she had loved. Had who else had she loved? Symmetris, Tiber Septim, and Straw. She remembered the big blonde stable boy with sudden and intense affection. She never realized till now, but she had loved Straw. Only she had never let him know. She had never been so. Wait, she had been so young then. These had been carefree days. Halcyon days, Halcyon days, before everything, before all this, before him, not Symmetris, the nightingale. She was shocked in spite of herself. The man could still affect her. Even now, even after all that has happened, a strong wave of inchoate emotion swept over her. Snowball doesn't know that word either. When she turned back at last, Uriel's septum had vanished, and the nightingale sat in his place. You knew, he said quietly, scanning her face. You knew instantly. I wanted to surprise you. You might at least have pretended. Barenziah spread her arms, trying to pacify the maelstrom churning deep inside of her. I'm afraid my skill at pretense is no match for yours, my liege. He sighed. You're angry. Just a little, I must admit, she said icily. I don't know about you, but I find betrayal a trifle offensive. How human of you. She took a deep breath. What do you want of me? Now you are pretending. He stood up to face her directly. You know what I want of you. You want to torment me. Go ahead. I'm in your power, but leave my children alone. No, no, no. I don't want that at all. Barenziah. He came near, speaking low in the old caressing voice that had sent shivers cascading through her body, the same voice that was doing the same thing to her. Here and now, don't you see, this was the only way. His hands closed on her arms. She felt her resolve fading, her disgust at him weakening. You could have taken me with you. Unbidden tears gathered in her eyes. He shook his head. I didn't have the power. But now, I have it all. Mine to have, mine to share, mine to give to you. He once more waved his hand towards the window and the city beyond. All Tamriel is mine, to lay at your feet. And this is only the beginning. It's too late, too late. You left me to him. He's dead. The peasant's dead. A scant few years. What do they matter? The children can be adopted by me, and we'll have others together. Barenziah, oh, and what children they'll be. What things we shall pass on to them. Your beauty and my magic. I have powers you haven't even dreamt of. Not in your most untamed imaginings. He moved to kiss her. She slipped his grasp and turned away. I don't believe you. You do not. You do know. Wait. You do. You know. That's not normal. You're still angry. That's all. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Tell me what you want, Barenziah. Barenziah, my beloved. Tell me, it shall be yours. Your head. Her whole life flashed in front of her. The past, the present, and the future still came to different times, different lives, different Barenziahs. Which one was the real one? Which one was the real Barenziah? For by that choice she would determine the shape of her fate. She made it. She knew. She knew who the real Barenziah was, and what she wanted. A walk in the garden, my liege, she said. A song or two, perhaps. The nightingale laughed. You want to be courted. And why not? You do it so well. It's been long. Besides, since I've had the pleasure. He smiled. As you wish, milady Queen Barenziah. Your wish is my command. He took her hand and kissed it, now and forever. And so they spent their days in... What? Actually, I'm running out of time. So I'm going to have to leave it off there. Snowball will read the last part in the next video right after this one. This will probably end up being a 2 or 3 parter. Have a good day. Bye-bye.